Welcome back to the Word and Journey podcast and the Wheel of Time. Ongoing discussions as the wheel wins and winds and turns and things. So here I am again with Matt Renzi. We have finished the Amazon Prime show season 2 and are comparing and contrasting it with the books and just offering general commentary for your pleasure. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm doing well today, man. Yeah, it's good to be back again.
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
stoked about this.
Me too. I was reflecting with someone on just the experience of taking in stories together. And I feel like there's a way that I know a person, like those things, like you don't really know a person until you fight with them or until you shop with them or whatever. I kind of feel like there's a way where you know a person in a particular way when you shared stories together, or shared a love for stories. So,
or what they're consuming or into.
Yeah. So, all that to say, I'm enjoying the Wheel of Time parts of you very much.
I enjoy the Wheel of Time parts of me too, and I enjoy the Wheel of Time parts of you as well.
Aw, shucks. Yeah. So cool. Well, let's jump into it a little bit. So the last half of season 2, what's either like a favorite scene or like a prominent theme that you see coming out in how the movie makers have made this show?
So first off, I think I've enjoyed the second season a bit more than the first season, and I'm getting more comfortable with some of the creative licensure that they're taking with the show versus the books. It's just okay, they're going to do that. I got to go with it if I'm going to enjoy it. I think things that really stand out to me from this season, there's a lot of revenge, and then also nobody is inherently good. Everything is shades of gray. Whether it's the White Cloaks, I mean, we got the Shan-Chen, you have Rand, Egwene, the Aiel. Everything's kind of shades of gray, and that's really standing out to me.
I get that sense too. And just pulling at the worldview of the story, if I'm following the worldview right, I mean, it's sort of like a-religious in a way. They sort of have a devil figure in the Dark One, but they don't really have a god figure or a central god figure. And the closest they get to a savior figure would kind of be the Dragon Reborn. But then, like you say, he's just caught up with it with the rest of them, and he's not necessarily working for the redemption of all humankind. He's just kind of a tool of the wheel. They're in relation to the wheel. The wheel weaves as the wheel will, and only the Ta'veren can ever affect it. But even then, only locally, and maybe only for their own ends. So
there definitely isn't. It's a weird mythology in that there is definitely a devil antichrist type figure, and no true deity or savior figure. Almost kind of Buddhism, panentheism, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to nail down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because it's derived from something, so it's a fictional rendering, but which for story purposes feels really interesting, and it makes for a really interesting world. But if we're going to watch for, okay, so what are the messages we're feeding ourselves with this? I know what's your take, comparing and contrasting from a Christian viewpoint, certainly, or from a Western viewpoint more generally, although some of Christianity is Eastern also.
I think, I mean, Christian viewpoint's kind of its own thing. It's neither Western or Eastern. It has iterations that are kind of localized, but it's, I think the drawing of this, that there's this sense of us that there's something evil in the world, and we have to have some type of evil figure to strive against. Most people, I think, intuitively get that or have a sense of that, because the only other option, I guess, is like, we're the evil figure. And I think that's too close to the mark and also like ego dystonic for most people. So there has to be some type of Satan type figure, and the Dark One fits very well with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the lack of a deity in the show really kind of creates this imbalance, and also leads to a lot of the grayness and the ambiguity, because
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that's truly good. It's like preference or culture or style, and nothing transcends that, which is really showing up in very different circumstances. And I think there's a piece of that that really resonates true to life with me,
Mm-hmm.
where there's certain things that are very culturally bound and are different from culture to culture. And then there's some things that I think that transcend cultures and are good apart from any kind of cultural contextualization.
Yeah. Like, what's an example?
Sacredness of human life.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's at least one. I mean, the beauty of nature.
Yeah. 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 I'm thinking about like this world, like you're saying, where there's not a central God figure, so there's not like an absolute good. And so then what you get is a lot of people with shades of a morality that ranges, different shades of gray, and all in their individual contexts, kind of working toward their own ends. And if you look at them closely, a lot of them are trying to do good. So I'll get on the IFS soapbox a little bit. So again, within internal family systems, there's we look at the human person as a collection of parts. One category is like the managers, they're the protectors. Another category is, so we talk about like these different protective parts that are either proactive or reactive. But then the parts that end up getting noticed in therapy are what we call the burden parts that have gotten pushed into such extreme roles that they're now causing damage, and often causing the problems they mean to try to prevent. So self-harm is a great example. Like, I'm in so much pain, if I just like remove myself from the situation, that'll alleviate the pain. There's kind of a logic there, but it's super extreme. Or like, if I like criticize this person enough, they'll finally get their act together and do something good with their life. And so in this story, so we see, someone like Rand, he's like, kind of like, he's trying to do good. He's kind of a good guy, but then he's teaming up with the Aes Sedai, and who knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
At any time. But then
or Lanfear.
Or Lanfear, yeah. But even like the White Cloaks, they're portrayed as villains, and the Shanshan, they're portrayed as villains. But if you listen to what they talk about, they're opposed to the Dark One.
Yeah.
They're trying to help the world in a particular way, both really tyrannical, we could even say demonic,
yes,
and everything. But we could almost see them as they're these like severely burdened protectors trying to do good, but again, lacking a central reference point or lacking a tradition to really inform what that is. And so I suppose, if anything, like the show is kind of depicting, okay, so when you take out a central God figure or a central tradition, this is kind of what happens. And look, we have fun doing it.
Yes, and I also think like something that's coming up to me is also like, the means don't justify the ends. And I think that the show, I'm not sure that they're conveying that message super well, because you have things like the White Cloaks, and they're yucky, and then they're invading Falm and trying to help the people there, and you're like, oh yeah, that's great. And then you have the Shanshan that are taking over the world so they can oppose the Dark One, and you're like, wow, I don't like exactly what you're doing there, Russia. Sorry. And then you have like Egwene, who kills her captor out of like straight up revenge, and you're like, whoa, you now had this woman in your power and you did the exact same thing to her that she did to you.
Hmm.
Like, and then almost even worse though. Is that is that the right call? I don't think
Hmm.
so, but that's seems to be celebrated as the good person move.
Hmm.
So it's really conflicted there.
Yeah, that's sort of the challenge of the anti-hero. Like, I mean, classic example, Batman, the Dark Knight, who kind of he uses criminal means. I mean, in one sense, he's a criminal, but we like him because he fights other criminals. But then makes a big mess of it as he does it, and so Egwene's a great example. Like, uh, you could look at her in that moment, and from one standpoint, yeah, like the rageful part of me that feels oppressed and everything is like, yeah, like kick her. Um, but then, yeah, there's a little part of me that really wants to see her make a truly heroic choice.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the thing is like, the way the show is going is like the heroes are the ones who are the strongest, who are maybe the most violent, who get what they want in the end, rather than the ones who are like in control of themselves or becoming healers or the most compassionate or anything.
Or principled or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Nynaeve really stands out to me as a heroic character throughout this so far.
Mm-hmm.
And she seems to be fitting that mold.
Yeah. 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 I've definitely enjoyed her. It's been interesting the way she's depicted as like super powerful, but not having regular access to it.
Yep.
What are some other points from Nynaeve's story that depict heroism, do you think?
Well, she's the one that really kind of resists the Aes Sedai and the tower so far instead of kind of going along with it. She's also the one that's acknowledged for her power, and then she seems to be a little bit taking the lead when there's the rescue for Egwene going on, and she's in the central piece of that. And also when the daughter heir gets wounded, she's there with her, kind of caring for her and ensuring that she's okay. And all of those Nynaeve's really standing out to me.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, she looking at what her motivations are. Like Egwene kind of wants power and status. Rand, he's kind of just wants to like avoid things, and like he's a little bit avoidant. He tries to be. Uh, Matt just wants to win, and Perrin. We'll talk about Perrin. But with Nynaeve, yeah, she's really driven by she wants to protect her people.
Yeah.
And keep her loved ones close. And there's a little bit of an isolationist flair to it because she doesn't extend that to everyone. But
yeah.
but she's not driven by power, like some of the others are. So if we put on our hero spectrum, we could put her maybe toward the more like virtuous end of things.
She's definitely seeming more virtuous at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Nynaeve, so we both pinpointed that this one scene, it was in episode 4 where she goes through the arches, which I felt like there's like some irresistible insights to pull from that scene. So briefly narrating, so there's within the White Tower, the Aes Sedai School of Magic, one of the initiation rites from novice to accepted is they have to go through these 3 arches, and like it's like past, present, and future. And if I'm remembering right, they have to like they encounter a fear, like one of their greatest fears related to past, present, and future. And a liberty that the show takes is that at one point Nynaeve gets stuck. She gets stuck in the future one, and like they think she's lost, and there's some fun bits there. And
the arches come back only at one time, and they have to like interrupt the thing and go through the arch.
Yeah. So I know the imagery that was really standing out for me was the sense, and it was like in the past one, there's the sense of I was experiencing the arches as depicting fantasy and the hazards of fantasy. Like she goes back and there's this maybe rumination oriented fantasy of like, oh, if only I could have. And we as counselors, we as Christians know that there's a lot of hazard there. In the present, there's very much this like, well, maybe I can like escape my present moment or just like fears, the cares of today, being overwhelmed with those, and there's some hazards there. I really strongly felt in the third arch, though, is like the future oriented one. It depicts her going off in this fantasy life. She, settles down with Lan, they have a kid, and it's this really idyllic life, but it's complete fantasy. And that's the one where she almost gets stuck. And I feel like there's a lot to learn there in just like the hazards of fantasy, like getting caught up in what's unreal, or I don't know. We stray into dangerous ground when we leave what is real, which is, I know, a major part of like a lot of recovery disciplines too. Sobriety is like encountering and staying in reality. So I know those are some powerful image bits for me there. But what are some of your thoughts on Nynaeve and the Arches?
You've done such a good job of summarizing it. Quite honestly, it's kind of that's a great summary of kind of what happened and also like insights from it. I think what stands out to me is often when I'm sitting with someone and they're talking about something that's happened, and they say, I wish this had happened, or I should have done that, or XYZ, whatnot like that, almost that like past piece. They then play out a future scenario that always has a positive outcome. So if I had done this, then this would have happened, and it always has a positive outcome. And they get stuck in that arch. And it's this totally imagined world that doesn't have any actual connection to reality, but they're imagining a more positive outcome than where they're currently at. And it just gets people stuck up. If I had married that person, if I hadn't made this choice, whatever. No one ever plays out a negative scenario. And I think that's part of what the arches are getting at, or illustrate that there's always this draw to this imagined reality that isn't currently tangible, and we can get lost in it.
Yeah, very easily. And so enter the value of like a lot of our mindfulness disciplines, or like breathing techniques, or any sort of reflective awareness, or prayer rules. They're at their core. They're meant to bring us back to reality, back to the world as is, even like back into our bodies. And there's a lot of ways where like that's our safe spot, because this is what's real. The inner life as it is what's real. And we lose a lot when we stray from that.
I absolutely agree with the piece of the bring us back to the present and being here. I think we're running the risk at the moment, or I'm worried at the moment, that someone listening will think that imagination and fantasy is not a good thing or not a helpful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's helpful either, because I think imagination and fantasy needs to be directed to the right facility. So imagining, if I overcome this, how would I be different? And being able to have a vision of ourselves different than we are now, that's more of a redeemed self, and being able to believe in that. I think even just for the average Christian, or I mean, if a human being has some type of longing, there takes an imagination to believe in the spiritual realm. There's currently a realm, a dimension, whatever you want to call it, heaven, whatever, has some overlap with earth, and it's populated by spiritual creatures. We know there's at least 2 divisions of these spiritual creatures, angels and demons. Whether there's more subdivisions, people argue about, whatever. But that's actively going on. And though, as we're doing a podcast and I'm drinking my water and I'm seeing clients for therapy, it takes a bit of imagination to remember, oh yeah, that's happening too. And I think that's one of the positive sides of imagination, is that it can transform our current reality and help us imagine a better reality, and then also gives us insight to more of the world than we can just experience at the moment, or maybe that we're aware of at the moment. So that's I love fantasy. I love imagination, because it really, it feeds that part of my brain.
Yeah, which is a good point. There's, God is not a materialist. They're the things that we're not limited to just what we can see and touch with our five senses. There's a lot more reality to be able to perceive, and it takes that sense can be cultivated. So,
Yeah.
so I've heard it talked about where like the fantasy genre, for example, is useful when it talks about things that are true, even in imaginary terms. And so I know, someone like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings gets held up as an example. Middle Earth does not exist. Sorry, but the story talks about true things, and it talks about true forces and true, universal truths in a really powerful way. Chronicles of Narnia, a really great example too. And we could say, yeah, even in the Wheel of Time, there's all of these fictitious elements, but there are truths that are worth contemplating here. And in that sense, it's useful. Where fantasy becomes unuseful is where there's no basis in reality, or there's not any redemptive quality, not any how good could I be, but more just like how much can I escape life. So yes, that's a wonderful point.
Totally agree. Great summary, man. Other things that stand out to you from the episode, or things that pop up?
Okay, so I'm thinking about a Perrin thing and then a Rand thing. So with Perrin, so Perrin's on this journey. He's got this strong communion with the wolves, and in the show anyway. So he's got this sort of mentor figure with him who's like also a wolf person. And I forget if he was in the books or not. But
yes. Yep.
Yes. Okay. So there's this one dialogue they have where, and I forget exactly how it went, but they're talking about like who is Perrin's pack. This mentor is saying, well, the wolves, they're your pack. But you watch Perrin, his character, and he very much identifies like his two rivers friends as his pack. Rand and Mad and Egwene and Nynaeve, and everything. And so I felt like right there that it was kind of introducing this question of like, well, who's the real Perrin and who is his identity? And kind of what's the balance of who am I destined for versus who do I choose? Like his mentor seems, forgive me, I can't remember his name. His mentor seems to think, oh, you're destined to be one of the wolves. But Perrin wants to choose to be of the two rivers folk. So there's that interesting discussion. I'd be curious your take on that. What insights can we pull?
I think I'm blanking on Perrin's mentor's person's name at the moment. I'm trying to Google it as we're talking, so I'm totally distracted. But I think one of the things that will come up is, well, one of the things that pops up with Perrin is definitely that identity and who he belongs to. I mean, spoiler alert here, but eventually Perrin doesn't pick either identity, but says, I'm going to be my own thing. And I can belong to these different identities, and they don't have to fully exclude me from these other kind of people that I belong to. And I think that's a really interesting development. I have two identities that kind of seem like they're mutually exclusive, Marine Corps combat veteran, therapist. And typically people like, which one are you? And it's like, well, both. And well, how can those things coexist? Well, they coexist very well, but just because you wouldn't think that they coexist, or that's hard for you to fit that frame together, doesn't mean that it's not something that I'm comfortable with in my identity. And I think there's a lot of people that struggle with, how do these different aspects of my identity go together? I'm an addict. I'm also a professional. And I have to kill the addict side of myself to be a professional. And it's like, no. Your addict's part of you, but let's channel that piece from unhelpful stuff to help that addict jam on other stuff. You don't need to kill that piece of yourself. Rather, how does that fit with who you're currently, or what? How to use that positively. So, I see that coming out a lot. I really like Perrin's storyline. He seems like a homebody to me, and I'm like, oh, bro, dude, I just like you, man. You seem like the guy that would be happy with a stew and some bread and good work and take care of your place. I really like him. And he's like caught up in this thing, and he's just trying the best he can.
Yeah. Yeah, I like him for that reason too. He's really like non-pretentious and like also like not after power.
Yeah.
He'd like to go home and just be a blacksmith
Yep.
and work with his hands and be simple in that way, which is really great. I love this idea you're developing though of looking at identity as this more expansive thing where like it doesn't have to be a rigid I'm this or that exclusively. It often can be a this and that. Uh, Not necessarily to equal degrees either, and not even like constant through all time. And I've definitely discovered that about my own self. Here's my orthodox self. Here's my professional self. Here's my addicted self. Here's my I love to have fun self. Here's my angry self.
Yeah.
I don't want to get rid of any of those parts, but I also don't want any one of them on their own. Well, maybe like the orthodox part, but I don't want any of them on their own to fully be me or all
Yeah.
that there is to me. So I guess the trick is it takes more words. It takes more time to explain that. I was talking with a group of high schoolers about like how to identify yourself, and they really actively did not like the idea of like labeling themselves. And so kind of the compromise we were aiming for is like, well, what if you could give yourself a cluster of labels and just have that be the normal? Like, it will always take at least 12 words to describe me, 12 label words to describe me, because there's at least that many important things about me that all need attention.
Yeah.
And
as we're talking about this and this is coming up, I think one of the things I'm realizing is I don't think Perrin's mentor was right. He didn't need to choose one or the other. I think what's coming up is Perrin's mentor chose his identity to identify with the wolves, and he's now forcing Perrin to make the same choice that he made. And I think that's often where people get tripped up. We engage someone that's made a funky choice on what they're going to do with their identity, and they've limited themselves to what they are. And then they're kind of by nature that asking us to do the same thing. And we're like, oh crud. Okay. I guess I got to do that.
yeah, it's a danger inherent to some forms of teaching, some forms of evangelism, some forms of probably of healing counseling too, is kind of limiting your scope to your own experience. This is the thing that worked for me, therefore it will also work for you in the same way. And that's probably the fallacy. Some aspects of what works for me might work for you in some cases, but we're different people, so it's not ever going to be a one-to-one match. And factoring in, well, who are you actually, is important. But yeah, even then, not to reject all of tradition, because again, so I'm coming from the Orthodox standpoint where we say, well, there are parameters and there is a way to salvation, but it's it's both specific, but it's also like able to be individualized a little bit within some parameters because people come to it from different places. So yeah, it just takes more words to talk about it.
Wait, everything's not overly simplistic and easy to communicate? Come on.
Nope.
Other themes from the show we want to explore were popping up. You had a great list of items.
Yeah. So I think my favorite scene from this half of the show was this little interchange between Rand and Lan as Rand is waiting to go to see the Amerlin seat. And I don't know. It just felt really, really heartwarming. Like having Lan be able to, Lan's been in kind of a funk for a lot of the show, and Rand's just been off the deep end for a lot of the show. But here they're finally back, and Lan is stepping into kind of a father figure role, kind of a mentor, kind of an older brother sort of role. He's like, Rand, tuck in your shirt. Keep this in mind. And he's just like, supporting him and guiding him. And Rand's just like this anxious wreck, before he's going in. But Lan delivers this great line to Rand, where he says, don't be so selfish. You were born to protect this world and every person in it, not just those you love. And then a little bit later, there's one rule above all others for being a man. Whatever comes, face it on your feet. And I think part of why I'm drawn to this sort of interaction is being aware of like my own needs and hungers for like older men to like
Yeah.
speak into my life and to kind of say this is how to be a man.
Yeah.
Like now that we've just talked about like there's like not always just one way to do things. There's part of me that still though wants to say, well, how have other people done it?
Yeah.
And will there be somebody who cares enough about me to say, yeah, tuck in your shirt, face it like a man, and this is how to be. I don't know, it felt like a really in the story world like a really great gift for someone like Lan to be able to give to Rand, and Rand's character seemed really open to that and to really thrive in that sort of nurturing attention. So I think I was noticing like kind of the nurturing components there and some of this exploration of like, what does it mean to be a man? Here's this young guy figuring out, well, he's got to figure out what does it mean to be the dragon reborn?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, by the way, what does it mean to be a man also? So
I totally resonate with what you're saying about that, like needing a mentor figure and someone to tell me kind of how to be a man, and not in like a toxic, overly masculine way, but like, what am I supposed to do? How do I parent? Like, how do I engage my kids? How do I engage my wife? What am I doing? Like, and just all the questions that pop up that it seem really ambiguous, and you just want someone else to say, here's a template of how I did it well. You don't have to do it exactly this way, but here's what I did. And having some of that kind of guidance for the last about 8 months of my life, I've had an older male mentor that I talk with every 2 weeks. And it is such an absolute relief just to know that like all these things that come up in life, I can call him and say, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And part of the thing that's so heartwarming between Rand and Lan is Rand trusts Lan and knows that Lan like is a like good source of like feedback for him, or like a trusted source of wisdom, and cares for him as a person. I really resonated with that interaction as well. The only thing that I didn't like is that just face it on your feet. The piece with that feels a little bit like kind of man up and take whatever's coming at you as long as you're kind of on your feet. And there's like, hey, there's some moments where I'm kind of facing the carpet, wiping my tears, and that's okay too.
mm-hmm.
I'm not going to run away from it, but it's kind of running me over. And
yeah,
I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, I think so. And we could definitely want that particular phrase to be, softened or repackaged a little bit. I might have, if I were in the scene, I would have been like, whatever happens, like take responsibility for your part in it.
Yeah.
A little bit different. But I love your idea too of like, sure, face things on your feet, except for when you have to be on the carpet because you're just overwhelmed, and then it's okay to ask for help. Like, yeah, those are true too. But
it was it's still just a great scene. Lan's such a fun character.
He is. It's been it's been fun to see him develop, and like kind of watching him and Rand, watching him and Moraine, and watching him just like be both he's an interesting character because he seems to also be really thrive on the relationships. Like when he's connected to somebody, he's strong. He knows what he's about. For those moments in the show where like he's not with any of his friends, he and Moraine are unbonded there, and they're on the outs. He's just like floundering and despairing. And so, again, there's this depiction of, well, we really do better when we're with people and when we're connected to people. It doesn't have to be a lot of people, but there should be at least one person who knows you all the way, or pretty close.
Hopefully,
yeah. So,
one other thing that's or a theme that's standing out to me right now is Rand and Lanfear, and this really complicated relationship where Lanfear's got like this obsession with Rand, and Rand at some point plays into it to manipulate it, and you're like, what are you doing, dude? You're going to ask Lanfear to break you out of prison? This doesn't seem like a good idea. And it ends up like working out, but there's a piece of me that like when Lanfear is going through the foregate and lighting everything on fire and blowing up all these families and stuff, like Rand, that's your collateral damage, bro. Like, is that the only option, is to collude with this, like,
Mhm.
actively super evil, really kind of twisted, creepy creature? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really great toxic depiction of a toxic relationship, toxic enmeshment, chaotic enmeshed for sure. We could even make it like a metaphor for, those people caught in active addiction who are in the belief that they can control their use or control the relationship with it. And it's a point a lot of people have to go through. Sure, I know there's risks, I know there's collateral damage, but I can control her, Lanfear, Lanfear, the Lanfear of my life. Like, I can control this thing, I can make it do my will, I can make it work for me, and I won't really have to work for it. Sure, I may get some cuts and bruises, but I'll be fine. There's uh yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, biblical metaphors around, like, trying to, like, control the strange woman, but, like, really it's like playing with fire. Okay, that's not a true biblical metaphor. I'm mixing some elements there. Bible scholars, don't hate me. Yeah. uh, but yeah, it's risky business. Very, very risky.
It felt that's it's just interesting, and I feel like Lanfear is such a well portrayed character, where she's both very engaging, very charming, and, like, you also are like, oh, you're, like, repulsively evil all at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, and you have both of those pieces really melded. The actress did a phenomenal job in putting that on screen, where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I have visceral reactions of, oh yeah, you seem like a nice person, and also, no, you're absolutely horrible, all at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. Yeah. She's really well done. I really enjoyed her character and how she was depicted and acted and everything. But so I guess a caution to be aware of with her. So, maybe comparing someone like her to someone like the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, with the White Witch, there was no question she's evil. She's evil, only evil. She wants to, like, enslave everyone, turn the kids to stone. Like, she's just bad. And there's in that she's not ever she's allowed to just be bad. She's not ever really humanized. With Lanfear, at least the way that she's portrayed in the show, there's this kind of weird element where she's really powerful, but, like, among the Forsaken, she's kind of like on the outs there, or she's like the Forsaken among the Forsaken, and so we kind of are privy to some of, like, her own struggles in a way, which generally I think is a good move in a character. It makes them more relatable and more it humanizes them in a way. Only in this case, we're, like, humanizing the monster, and they're, symbolically, and there's something to be careful about there, because, like, I mean, a monster is a monster, and we might be in some treacherous ground if we try to say, oh, here's this evil thing, let's make her pretty, let's give her some heartache, and, like, oh, maybe we can, like, welcome her in a little bit. Again, there might be some sketchy narrative ground, if we take that approach to all people and all times, possibly.
I think so. And I think also your piece of, like, there's this really kind of evil thing, but maybe serves a good at some time, so I'll only use it for a while or for a specific purpose. And I think for many people, alcohol, methamphetamine, whatever, has been their Lanfear to get them out of the cage of trauma. But once they're out of the prison of trauma, they're into the prison, they're into Lanfear's prison, and you're double binded then, because you have both that you're dealing with.
Yes. The ultimate of double binds. Let them who know what that is tremble.
Yeah.
So maybe last quick thoughts. Why would you say someone should or should not partake of this story?
Well, one, the reading the book was less viscerally brutal than the show. The show had a lot of parts in it where I was like, oh, I feel this is, like, viscerally brutal, and the brutality of it really struck me when it didn't strike me reading the book. So I would caution with that. The show is also has a really, like, darkness around it. It doesn't shy away from there's darkness in the world and there's some really evil things out there, and it really engages in that. And so I think anybody that's sensitive to that, to be really careful with that. I do think that this second season, the acting has been absolutely superb. I have minor quips where I'm like, I want this to go different in the show. I mean, Bridget Silverbow, it's like, no, come on, why? The conflict of like, you have literally the Shan Chen that are invading this town, and the Horn of Valor brings back their great ancestor Arthur Hawkwing, who's going to fight against them. It's like, come on, play up that tension some more. Like, come on, people don't even know who that is at the moment. What's happening? There's other tensions that I wish that they would have engaged in, but I think overall, if you're into fantasy, you like fantasy, you're willing to deal with a little bit of the dark. I think it's a good show to watch.
Yeah. I resonate with you there. And then just thinking the story world in general, like what makes this like collective story worthwhile. I mean, I'm appreciating, there's these heroes arcs going on, and you get to explore that. And they do a lot with relationships. Like, here's how characters are when they're with people versus when they're on their own. And like we were saying too, like kind of this exploration of like, how does a world work where their primary guiding force is this impersonal kind of destructive wheel? What will people do then? So it's worth some reflection, and like I think we've discovered there's maybe some applications for how we approach our own lives as well. So not on the level of like Holy Scripture, but certainly worth thinking about.
It's a fun story.
It's a fun story. Yeah, I might see if I can pull some clips into my group for metaphor's sake. But anyway, well. I know we got to wrap in a minute, but to the listener, if you're with us, thanks for tracking along. Thanks for watching the show. You should also read the books. I learned my lesson after season 1. And you can rate, review the show. Check us out at patreon.com/MosesBarnaby, as it's spelled on the screen. And check back in. We'll be back with more stories, more discussions, and it'll be fun.